making membership part of the solution. The Crisis Tunity framework guides organizations through the process of identifying the problem in the world they're working to fix and inviting people to become part of the solution by becoming members. The Intercept in the US will share how they use that framework to make their membership pitch and how it can be used to spark action beyond just financial support. I'm personally really excited about this session because our research director, Emily Goligoski, when she did her research into member-driven movements beyond news, one of the things that she heard again and again when she spoke to members of those organizations is that one of the reasons they became a member is because it felt like one way that they could fix something that feels broken in the world. And so this presentation from the Intercept feels like a continuation of that research that we published now 2 or 3 years ago. And they will give us some really practical advice on how to make that actionable. So I'm excited to introduce Kate Myers. Kate was the executive director for First Look Institute, where she led revenue strategy and business operations for the Intercept, Field Division, and the Press Freedom Defense Fund. She launched the Intercept Successful Membership Program in the US and Brazil, and before that spent a number of years at National Public Radio in roles that included digital product work, business development, audience development, and corporate strategy. She's joined today by her colleague, Michael Sherrard, who is with the Intercept. He brings a background in grassroots mobilization and digital strategy to the Intercept's membership program, which has more than doubled under his leadership. He most recently served as the first executive director of Faithful America, which organizes social justice-minded Christians to challenge right-wing extremism. He previously held a variety of political, product, and fundraising roles at MoveOn.org and worked for Sojourners and M&R Strategic Services. Kate, Michael, we're glad to have you today. And I will stop sharing my screen so you can put your slides up. Have we got Michael as well? Great.
Ariel, thank you so much. Hold on, let me share my screen. Assume all you guys can hear me and see me. It's really great to have a chance to be here at the wrap up of the summit. I think that there's certainly, as someone who's been watching and involved with the Membership Puzzle Project from the start, it's really great to see so many people here and the impact you guys have had. So Michael and I wanted to share some of our learnings here from our years of running the Intercept membership program. So as Ariel said, I joined First Look, which is now First Look Institute, in 2017, which there may have been a few things going on in the US at that point. We chose to launch our membership program as our first project, and we weren't sure how it was going to go, but we knew we were onto something when we had 998 people choose to join us on the first day of our program. What we found over time, so we launched in 2017 in the US. In December of 2018, we launched our program in Brazil. And what we found were people really, really willing and interested to step up to support not just the work we do, but who understood the impact on the world of the work we do and the change we were trying to achieve. By the end of last year, over the years that we had the program, we had grown to over 75,000 members and over 90,000 people, close to 100,000 people who had ever given one gift to the Intercept or the Intercept Brazil. The final piece to it really, and I'm going to hand this to Michael, is especially when Michael came on in 2019, was we really understood at that point that the Intercept wasn't a charity. The Intercept was a movement. So bringing in Michael's expertise and his understanding of how these kinds of movements works was critical for the success and the growth of the program. So Michael, let me hand it to you.
Kate. So I just want to talk a little bit about a sort of way of thinking about how we invite readers to support our work. That does come from a background not in media, and credit here goes to a former colleague of mine from the Move On days, Ben Branzel. Like, when these slides go out, this link to his original presentation, I highly recommend. And really the core realization here is that we're talking about the combination of crisis and opportunity. Allegedly there's the same Chinese character for both words. I don't speak Chinese. I'm told that's not actually true, but the point is that readers are looking at urgent threats in the real world that we need to describe to them as urgent threats in the real world. But then we need a reader-focused theory of change for how we can make a difference together. It's not, not just we do good things, give us money, but here is the problem in the world that your donation will solve. So if you want to move on to the next slide, Kate, I've just got a handful of examples that I think walk through this. So this is actually one of the more successful fundraising appeals that we've had in the last couple of years. We've gone back to repeatedly, and the urgency obviously was lent to it by the racial justice moment in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. But I really want to emphasize the forward-looking reporting opportunity that we had that was really unique here, to be able to say, look, we've got a massive leak of documents about police departments. We don't know all of what's in it. It's huge. We really need to devote the time and resources to reporting it out. And can you give us, $20 to support that work? Like I said, we went back to this repeatedly because it worked. And I think you see, quite obviously, what's the crisis? In this case, sadly, I think one we were really sort of all aware of at the time. And then what's the opportunity? Another example from a similar period, the outset of the pandemic. This is a little different. The opportunity is sort of front-loaded. Look, our traffic is skyrocketing. People are reading what we're writing. But here's the problem, and one that was, again, externally clear and salient, not some sort of arcane feature internal to our newsroom, but something that everyone can relate to. And then a more recent example from the Capitol insurrection. And again, I want to emphasize the forward-looking character of this, that it's not, we did good reporting, but it's here's a big problem in the world that's just surfaced, and here's the reporting that we need to do looking forward. And a reason why it's substantive and challenging. The reason I love this kind of crisis opportunity framework is because it forces us to pull back from the things that might seem sort of most salient to us internally and think about what's to our readers, to our members. As Kate, I think, is going to talk about, this really isn't a fundraising framework. This is a way to invite people to take action. Ariel read my background coming from Move On. I don't come from the world of media mostly. And so I was just as often writing emails asking people to sign petitions or call a member of Congress or any number of other things. And the same principle really applies here, that if you want people to join you in doing something together, you need to explain quite clearly and with some urgency, why it is that what you're asking them to do will make a difference. I was planning to take more time, but I think I covered it all. So I'll hand it back over to Kate.
Let me touch briefly on kind of the practicality, because one of the things The Intercept in some ways is by no means a traditional newsroom in many ways. However, you find editors and you find people that come from news backgrounds and not as many from advocacy backgrounds. And one of the traditional mores in news is to apologize for the phrase, but we report and you decide what you're going to do with that. And I really think, so inside of The Intercept, it took a little more convincing and discussion to really understand and internalize the value of a framework like this. One of the best ways that we found to do that was with data. So we actually did a fair amount of testing of questions and frameworks and appeals like this up against ones that were more traditional fundraising emails or membership appeals. The three we've highlighted here certainly have especially the Blue Leaks one we mentioned before, have really outperformed just the traditional ones we sent out. The other thing that we tested with a lot of these, we've used this framework for plenty of emails that didn't work. And one of the things, in some ways, in some cases, the threat wasn't strong enough. And in some cases, the urgency wasn't there in the same way. So really, each of those pieces, that urgency, that threat, that opportunity, really the opportunity that partnering with The Intercept can give you, all of those had to be there in order for this logic to work, in order for this to be a compelling ask. So we're really proud of both the people that we got, the close to 100,000 people over the years that we got to give to us or to support us or join us in this process. And we're really proud of that, but we're also really proud and here to help try to change the mindset of what we are asking people to do as members. And that's where I want to go to my final point here, and where I want to wrap us up, which is I want to talk about how we translate the membership work to action. So this is almost, instead of making the solution part of making membership part of the solution, this really shifts to making the solution part of the compact and the contract we have with members. As straight out, the mission of of many news organizations is really to drive accountability, to really push change, and to defend democracy. It's really important for, first let's establish, journalism is inherently about driving change. Journalism, whether that's a change in people's understanding of the world, and more often, in some ways, it reveals a particular injustice that can really only be solved with a change in society or laws. I think it's important that we all think it's important, or I think it's important, that news organizations have to acknowledge that, and that the line between journalism and advocacy, especially when the journalism lays out the explanations of the systems and even potential solutions, that gap is much smaller than we perceive. So let's go back to the Blue Leaks example. So the Blue Leaks example gave a clear, first off, the cache of documents that The Intercept got for the Blue Leaks project revealed a huge amount of police misconduct. Even our first stories identified overreach and other ways that police were just not being held accountable. The Intercept wanted to continue that work. Our members wanted to invest in it, but why? The reason our members wanted to invest in it is because they wanted to change the way that police were held accountable in this country, or pardon me, in the United States, in this case with Blue Leaks. In order to do that, that information needs to be taken to community meetings, to advocacy groups, to legal hearings, trying to change a theory of, in the US, there's a theory in the law of qualified immunity where it's much harder for outsiders to sue police or to essentially hold police accountable. There's even bills of rights for police. All of those sometimes stand as cover for these abuses that Blue Leaks helped reveal. Our members want us to report on that, not just because it's great work that the Intercept can do, but really because they want the impact. They want that information out there in order to change. So then how do we connect them? How do we connect them with advocacy groups or direct service organizations? How do we connect them with decision makers in government? How do we move decision makers outside of government? How do we essentially allow them to take the work that we do and then use that? How do we as a news organization then ask our members to help spark that change? it isn't just about our members championing us. It is us inviting them to make change with us. It has to be clear that this is something that we are doing together, and that is something that moves someone to become a member of a news organization. So let me hand this over to you. So Ariel, are there any interesting questions?
Yeah, I would like to ask one myself, and then we just got a question in from Sebastian. I'm curious, how did you determine which crises to sort of choose to build a theory of change around there? As you said, like when you started doing this, there were so many things happening in the United States that you could have run campaigns around. So how did you sort of figure out which crises sort of rose to that level to build a campaign around? And did you ever consider, not because you were worried about sort of burning readers out maybe on this sort of constant, there's this crisis and then this crisis. And so how did you balance between that?
Michael, do you want to weigh in on sort of the choice?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a dynamic conversation between what is, happening in the world that we know our readers are paying attention to and motivated by. So that's a moving target, right? Because what's happening in the world is moving. Look at a lot of, look at what's blowing up in the news cycle, what's blowing up on social media, what are peer organizations fundraising or mobilizing on, and not just media organizations, incidentally, advocacy and political groups that serve a similar audience. So that's sort of half of it. The other half of it, obviously, is what is the newsroom actually working on, and where is there an intersection? This Blue Leaks thing, I get to brag about, but it really got handed to me on a silver plate by a newsroom that was committed to that project and just happened to be focusing on it at exactly the right time. Obviously, you can't go to readers and say, give us money to report on XYZ when XYZ is a thing that we're not actually reporting on. If I could say just a word about sort of the donor fatigue question, I think this is generally something that people worry about too much. Folks who give you their email address, their phone number for SMS, whatever, they want to hear from you. They want to support your work. And the challenge is not, the risk generally, not always, but the risk generally is not, am I communicating with them too much? Am I hitting the panic button too much? It's, am I sending them stuff that isn't salient and urgent? And training them that, when they hear from me, it's sort of boring and dull and irrelevant. So that's where the testing comes in, where the urgency comes in. I would really worry far more if we were sending content to our readers that wasn't urgent and they didn't care about.
A great point about donor fatigue. We potentially worry about that a little too much. I remember I asked a newsroom for a story at one point, what are some things you wish you had known about your membership launch that you know now? And they said, unless you're completely sick of hearing yourself talk about your membership program, you're probably not talking about it enough. If you aren't uncomfortable with how often you're asking, you're not doing it enough. Question from Sebastian Ayunet. He said, I'm curious about whether The Intercept has tried or at least debated ways to get together with their members or include them in the newsroom's reporting beyond financial contributions.
So we discussed that at different points in time. It's one of those things that certainly in my experience, in some of my time at NPR, and in my experience here, in order to really make it authentic, it requires a lot of resources to do so. And rather than just having it just be a surface interaction, so that's one piece, is that we didn't lean into it because we didn't lean into it as much because we just didn't necessarily have the resources to make it really authentic. The other thing that we found also specifically is that we were mainly in some ways we were mainly an investigative newsroom that worked on stories and sort of broke stories rather than worked on stories in the public. So that gave us an additional level of threat. One place we could have used and didn't was on a data set, for instance, that we had already published and were researching. But again, resources, having the resources to really make it a true collaboration. So we did not pursue that.
It's a great point. Asking for participation and then not being able to actually act on that can end up leading readers to be even less likely to do it in the future.
Yep.
We have a question from Kim Proctor that is probably for Michael, but maybe both of you. How did you find out what your readers cared about in order to decide what to build campaigns around?
Well, I mean, the glib answer here is you test and you find out. I think people were very surprised when I came to The Intercept at how many appeals I wanted to test. And it wasn't because I necessarily wanted to hit send on all of them. I mean, it would have been great if they all had raised a lot of money, but this is how you figure out what works, is you try and you test. And we're very fortunate to have a very large email list. And so I can test to 30,000 people, and that's, a small fraction of the list. And we find out. I will say, all of us should be looking right at our traffic metrics. And I would say for us, that's not just sort of headline page views, which are often a function of, what got picked up somewhere else. We're looking at patterns and trends in loyalty, what's bringing readers back over and over again. That's a pretty good signal that it's something people care about. And then there's just some human judgment involved in sort of, we know the interests that Intercept readers have because of who we are. They tend to be people who are politically progressive. They tend to be people who have concerns about, the national security and surveillance states, skeptical of corporate political power. I mean, these things kind of tell us what to go looking for in the world. And I would recommend that people kind of trust their instincts in terms of understanding their brands and their readers.
It actually leads in, sorry, go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to make a comment on the scale of the testing. Michael, am I right that in our last end of year campaign, we hit the send button 178 times? Does that sound about right?
It seemed a little high, but it's in the right order of magnitude for sure.
What was the time frame of that end of year campaign that you sent 178 campaigns around?
I mean, it was December, but it was extremely backloaded, as you'd imagine. The majority of the sends probably happened between the 26th and the 27th and 31st of December.
Just so we're clear, that was not 178 separate appeals. That was you might hitting the different segments at different times for various reasons.
Got it. And I think that actually leads well into a follow-up question from Kim Proctor, which she's wondering if you could say a little bit more about how you tested different campaigns. Were you A/B testing, sending different messages at the same time? Was there just one version during each campaign? Say a little bit more about the details of that.
Yeah, all of the above. When possible, I try to test things against each other just because it makes it cleaner to read the results, to do a true A/B test at the same time. But again, we have a large list, and so if I send 20 or 30,000 people and watch it for a few hours, I can get a pretty good read on how many donations it would bring in if we sent it wider to the whole list. We do routinely test multiple subject lines. We intermittently test other sort of more mechanical things that I think are less exciting. What donation amount is suggested, that sort of thing. But I will say consistently, what I see in A/B testing is that different narratives about substantively different external urgency in the world is where you see the 2x 3x differences from one appeal draft to another. I think often people get bogged down in testing where to put a comma and what color to make the button, and you can sometimes see results there, but that's by and large not where you're going to get the big gains.
Can you give an example of one test where you saw a huge divergence between how one performed and another, especially if it was at sort of the substance of the message, as you just said?
Gosh, it happens pretty often. A recent example, which was not huge, but maybe was a 50% improvement, was we tested two appeals simultaneously. One that was about the climate. This is actually good for our purposes. It was one appeal that was about the sort of climate emergencies in the American West right now, the forest fires and sort of the escalating crisis of the climate. And another appeal was much more specifically about some really great reporting that we've been doing about environmental toxins and the corruption of the EPA. that appeal did, would have done okay if we'd sent it out wide, but it was very much about, sort of previous reporting that had already been published. And it didn't, it didn't have quite the external urgency that, we all feel around the climate this summer, especially in the American West. And so, we then saw the climate appeal do significantly better, and that's what we went wide with.
That's a great example. Thank you. And last question, which I think is relevant because many organizations with membership programs often have the membership program in some way built around one or two sort of individuals, the organization. Piotr asks, how did Glenn Greenwald departing from the Intercept affect the membership program, if at all?
So we had, so it's a great question, because I really think initially in 2017 and early on, there was we got a huge bonus from how many people associated and were moved by Glenn's work and chose to join the Intercept based on that. I think, frankly, if Glenn had left in 2017, we would be having a very different conversation. As the time went on, we really were able to, both the Intercept as well as the Intercept membership program broaden its appeal beyond one particular individual. So when Glenn left, that was hard, but what we found is we had some percentage of individuals that were recurring members choose to end their recurring. We did have pushback on the emails, but I used a little bit of my dark humor. I was at NPR in the United States when we fired Juan Williams, and Glenn's departure on a scale was really maybe 10% of that. Fox did not go. Fox went on Fox did not challenge the Intercept in the same way that they challenged NPR. So I think there is an evolution. I think the big takeaway is we probably missed some opportunities by not having Glenn with us, but it was by no means devastating. So, Michael, you've now been there for a little longer. If there's any color you want to add to that.
No, I mean, I would emphasize that we saw a sort of a one-time drop in recurring donations that was, larger than a current, in a normal month, we don't lose very many recurring members at all. So when it happens even a little bit, it's significant, but it didn't continue past that. The other thing I think that, people outside the Intercept maybe haven't realized in the last few months is that, Jeremy Scahill is as much sort of a face that our readers associate with us and our work as anyone, and he continues to be involved in our fundraising.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this. This is super practical and I think helpful for many newsrooms who are trying to figure out how to pitch their membership program and how to sort of vary their messaging. So thank you for all the great examples, Kate and Michael.
Thank you for having us.